Hi, SpongeX here. On September 28, 2023, Sega released the third and final free update to Sonic Frontiers, which by itself feels like its own game in general. The previous updates were overall kind of forgettable in my opinion and left a lot to be desired. The first DLC update was just a weak photo mode with many angle restrictions. I mean, it sounded like fun at first because there were some interesting set pieces in the game that where it's like, oh, that would make for a great image of Sonic like in a certain pose in front of this waterfall or something. And so it was cool how they gave you a photo mode, but it was way too restricted. The camera was just way too wonky, and so it made that feature feel very wasted. The music hunt feature was a fun addition where they added more collectibles to the game, these little music notes, and so it was fun to be able to just have an excuse to revisit the game's islands and find these little music notes that unlock songs from past Sonic games that you can either play or shuffle through. So it's basically a jukebox mode, and that was kind of fun. The second DLC added a boss replay feature, which sounded better than it actually was. It didn't let you just select and refight the four main bosses. Instead, it forces you to go through survival challenges against nearly every enemy and mini boss in the game, leading to a Titan boss at the end. And so you start off where you have like Cup 1 is the only one available, and it has like about like 9 enemies, and followed by the first Titan, Giganto. And you have to S rank it to move on to the other Titans. And so, yeah, that's really strict. Some people just, we already beat these guys, so why can't you just let us go back and refight them as we please? And no, it's forcing you to have to S rank, like get the best score possible out of these tournaments if you want to move on to the next round. That is really stupid. The game still didn't even have like a cutscene mode for those who wanted to rewatch the cutscenes, so there's still no way of rewatching them. You think they would have added that in an update? So, I don't know. I just felt like overall the DLC was very disappointing. Not to mention, we also got a real obnoxious Sonic Birthday Anniversary DLC where all it does is it adds annoying dubstep and filter effects to ruin the gameplay. As soon as I turned it on, I turned that mode off. It is annoying. So, the third and final update is without a doubt the best addition to the game. This is the one that everyone was hyped for, as it was like the only one that said it would be expanding on the story of the game, and it even said there would be playable characters. And for the most part, Sega was very quiet about this DLC. It wasn't until the day of release where they finally showed gameplay of it. They had like teaser trailers, but so on the day of release, everyone had a sigh of relief that, okay, the characters are fully playable, because Sega said the characters would be playable, but that could have meant a number of things. Are they only playable in one level? Are they just like in really short minigame segments? Define playable. Like, will we be able to control these characters and run around the hub world as we could as Sonic? And surprisingly and thankfully, yes, that was the case. I mean, especially considering this is a free DLC. They could have easily charged us extra just to be able to run around as 3 additional characters. And another thing is the characters each had their own unique moveset. So they definitely have a lot of moves that Sonic was able to do, but they have a lot that only they themselves can do. Really adding and devising up the gameplay. And so the DLC takes place shortly after Sonic's friends Tails, Amy, and Knuckles sacrifice themselves to save Sonic from his cyberverse corruption. So this final episode starts off with an abrupt alternate scenario where out of nowhere, Sage realizes, oh, there's another way to defeat the final Titan, and the end. So she has a way to bring back Tails, Amy, and Knuckles, and relies on them to collect the 7 Chaos Emeralds. They don't really say why they need, just once again, go out and get the 7 Chaos Emeralds, it's our only chance. So, very bland plot device stuff. So, just like the main plot of the original game, which was a huge mess in my opinion, just too much mission and objective briefing and very boring dialogue throughout. Just a long excuse for why we have to control other characters and how to get to point A to point B, just all that kind of stuff. Really boring overall. So, yeah, the story, just like in the original game, the story of this DLC was not its strongest take. The new DLC takes place on the final island from the original Sonic Frontiers, but with a lot of rearranged platforms, new platforms, and items rearranged to make the gameplay feel different for each character. The big draw for this DLC was the fact that it was bringing back playable characters, including the fan favorite original friends of Sonic, Tails, Amy, and Knuckles. Story and cutscene wise, the DLC was very underwhelming and very boring. It reminded me of Kingdom Hearts Remind in a way, where a lot of the cutscenes and gameplay are rehashes of the final level and battle, but stretched out and alternated to add more gameplay while trying to give a less depressing and more hopeful ending. So I was mostly disappointed with Kingdom Hearts 3 Remind. I felt like it was overall a waste of $30. I mean, it was half the price of the original game. It was much shorter than the original game. It just mostly felt like they were charging us $30 to rehash the final boss fights from the original game with a few tweaks here and there and an expansion on a level we briefly got to explore. Otherwise, it was not worth $30, and I didn't care for the extra boss fights they had, or not even the photo mode made up for it. It just was not worth half the price of a full retail game. I was satisfied with the original Kingdom Hearts 3, even with its controversial ending. I still thought that game alone was worth $60, but $30 for just an extended final battle that should have been the game to begin with, that was not worth it. So it got a lot of things wrong, but I feel like Sonic Frontiers, in a way, felt like Remind done better. I mean, Kingdom Hearts 3 Remind felt like broken or misleading promises. Kingdom Hearts 3 Remind, it teased that there would be more playable characters, but they were only used for one brief boss fight, and their stats were horrible, and it didn't give players the option to play as those characters again after beating those segments. You know, a part of me is like, oh, that'd be cool if you could go back to other levels, and now you can play as Aqua, Roxas, or Kairi. Nope. And so they were just used for one little boss fight, and once that part's over, that's it. The only way to do that is to start over the DLC and rework your way back to that fight. That's not fun. So Sonic Frontiers delivered on what it teased. Tails, Amy, and Knuckles are fully playable in an open-world setting. So they're allowed to jump and attack enemies and stuff like that. Just explore just nearly as much as Sonic could. There are restrictions and drawbacks preventing it from being perfect, and I'll get down to that more further on into the video. But while I didn't care much for the story or the new cutscenes of this DLC, I loved playing as the other characters again, especially in a 3D platformer setting. Which, you know, the 3D platformers have really been neglected with Sonic the Hedgehog over the years. It's like they always focus on just Sonic being playable, and over the years now, it feels like the only decent Sonic games they've been getting are the ones that are side-scrollers. But when it comes to pure 3D platforming, they've really been bad ever since after the Adventure era. And so, the other characters haven't been playable in a main Sonic game since 2006. So, nearly 17 years ago. The characters in this game were mostly fun to play as, but a lot of things held them back a bit. The biggest issue being the fact that it's built off of the gameplay of Sonic Frontiers, which was very wonky. It had some pretty bad and unresponsive controls that time, and awful combat. I mean, when you think of Sonic games, you're used to Sonic just mostly being able to defeat enemies quickly, just by quickly jumping at them or dashing through them, and almost every time you attack an enemy in this game, it has like really sluggish and heavy sound effects, and it just happens at such a slow pace with a lot of delays in between, and this isn't the kind of combat people want in a Sonic game. They want it to be fast and addicting, and this just felt too slow, and it relied too much on parry and counter abilities, and so unfortunately the combat still sucks. The characters were overall really fun to run around as, but when it came to certain mechanics, the characters were pretty unbearable to control at times. I've seen many already complaining about how bad Knuckles' climbing and gliding sections felt. So many already complained about how awful it feels to glide as Knuckles. But overall, playing as the characters was pretty fun. They start off very limited, just like Sonic did at the beginning of this game, and they have to relearn a bunch of their old abilities by collecting skill points, which you... mostly Sonic was able to get them in the game by either defeating enemies or by playing the fishing minigame and unlocking them through that, but for Amy, Tails, and Knuckles, they get the skills by having to find areas on the map where you find like little cocos, and they'll give you like 10 or more skill points if you find them. And so it's more of a Easter egg hunt to find them in this game. Because you can fight enemies, but the characters in this game are really underpowered, and the bosses in this are more like expert mode bosses. They're even stronger than they were in the main games. So they're not really going to have a good chance against these enemies. You're better off just running away from enemy encounters in this game. So, yeah. My biggest complaint with the characters is that there just isn't a proper character select until after you beat the game. Or should I say, if you beat the game. More on that later. The game can be summed up as being split into two phases, both having the same pattern. Each phase revolves around controlling a certain character, as each of them tries to find the 7 Chaos Emeralds, only to bump into a bunch of obstacles along the way. So just follow the map to where the game requires you to go. Characters get boring exposition and instructions on where to go next, rinse and repeat. That's practically what all the gameplay is. So after a character eventually gets a Chaos Emerald, the next character takes over, and we're forced to play as another character. So as soon as Sonic's friends find one Chaos Emerald, players are forced to play as Sonic again, as he has to race up 4 towers with painfully annoying and frustrating trials that are necessary to overcome in order to progress. After Sonic's part ends, Phase 2 repeats what Phase 1 mostly did, taking turns controlling each character until they find a Chaos Emerald, move on to the next character until Sonic takes over, leading to a 5th and final tower where the game's most brutal challenge awaits. So Phase 1 starts off with us being forced to play as Amy Rose. Amy was very fun to play as once fully upgraded. Many have complained how weird it is for most of Amy's moveset, though, how it mostly involves tarot cards instead of hammer attacks, the thing she's known for, attacking with a giant hammer. Many of Amy's moves are clearly inspired by her many hammer attacks from many games, but were replaced with card attacks instead. Amy has an infinite hover ability, which allows her to kind of like glide through the air. She had an ability like that in Sonic Heroes, where she rapidly spun around for hammer, causing her to float in the air a bit, but now she gracefully floats as cards spin around her. Instead of a rapid hammer spin like in Sonic Adventure, she now has cards spinning around her. Instead of a hammer catapult ability like in Sonic Adventure, she now has a bounce attack where cards spin around her. Her moveset was fun, but the over-reliance on Amy's small hobby of fortune telling, it got rather annoying, I must admit. At least there's the excuse that the only reason her moveset's different is because she's stuck in like a cyberspace, and so her abilities are like, she has certain abilities that she's more well known for that are lost, but in this new cyber form, she has some new abilities that she can only do in that form. Maybe that was the excuse they were going for. They even kind of sprinkled on it in like an optional cutscene between Amy talking with Tails. So they do kind of elaborate on that, how they have certain abilities that they feel like they can only do because of their corrupted forms, basically. Amy was still fun to control, though. She had great jump height and distance. She had a really interesting triple jump. Reminds me kind of like how she had a triple jump in Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric. And she has a bounce attack, a glide ability. So, just like Sonic, each character gets their own Psyloop ability, along with a boost, a parry, and a spin attack. The only thing Sonic can do that the others can't is the light speed dash, mostly running up green surface walls, but I think Tails can do that as well. Technically, Knuckles can too, but I'll get more on that later. And Sonic also has various attack specials and combos, along with being the only character who can go super form and fight the Titan boss fights. Amy can also use a homing attack like Sonic, and even has an upgrade where you can hold the homing attack button for her to lock onto up to 5 objects or enemies to do a rapid chain reaction homing attack. It leads to Amy blowing them all up with like a little heart effect, and it's a pretty cool attack. For a parry attack, she uses her hammer. It's kind of weird for her to mostly use her hammer for defense instead of actual attack. Like, why is she attacking with cards instead of her hammer? I don't get it. She uses her hammer for a counter attack instead. Kind of lame. She also gets an upgrade where her counterattack can poison enemies. So, while Amy is fun to play as when it comes to exploration or platforming, she unfortunately does not do well in combat, but neither do any of the other characters, and I kind of already explained why. I mean, even after maxing out Amy's attack and defense power, she still really didn't stand a chance against a lot of the mini-bosses throughout the game's overworld. The combat mostly revolves around using combo attacks, and Sonic's really the only character who has these combo attacks, so without them, you're just relying on characters that use one homing attack at a time, and it doesn't do enough damage. It doesn't help that you try using the character's other abilities, like Amy has a rapid attack where she can keep having cards spin around her. You use that by pressing the X button 3 times and then holding the X button on the third press, and it causes her to spin around like crazy. However, the X button also shares the same button as the homing attack, and so there are many times where I just wanted to use Amy's card attacks, but instead it causes her to lock onto an enemy and trigger a homing attack instead. And so it ruins a lot of attack strategies I had. Another reason why I questioned why this game made the punch button share the exact same command as the homing attack, it just didn't feel right. Part of me wishes these Sonic games would get rid of the double jump and just return to having the homing attack sharing the same button as the jump button. You think characters like Amy and Knuckles would be perfect for combat, but they are terrible in this game. You're forced to just run away anytime you accidentally bump into one of the overworld mini-bosses. And surprisingly, none of the characters get required boss fights. You're thinking they would have at least had one boss fight during their story mode required, necessary to advance further into the plot, and no, there aren't any. The only bosses you are required to face in this game are the ones during the final trial and final battle for Sonic. You don't even get good rewards for completing any of the optional mini-bosses in this game, so what was the point of having them around? Just like the main game of Sonic Frontiers, most of the collectibles in this game do absolutely nothing. Just focus on collecting skill points to unlock new skill tree abilities. It won't take long for that to get over with, and collecting Cocos to exchange to Elder Cocos for stat increases. Let's get on with the Cocos, though. I mentioned in my original playthrough that the game tries so hard to make us feel like the Coco are such important characters that we should care about, but in the end, I just didn't give a rat's ass about them, and the gameplay didn't seem to support that, because there's a lot of missions where the characters want you to help the Coco, but then during the gameplay little mini-games you have to do to help the Coco, they're not doing anything to help you back. Like, some of them are flat-out suicide bombing you, and it's like, why are we helping these little bastards? And so, yeah, this game just made me convinced that the real villains of this game are not the Titans, it's not the end, it's the Cocos. The Cocos are the real enemies of this game. Some of the most frustrating parts of this game are because of the Cocos and their goddamn trials. It's just, yeah, this game made me hate the Cocos even more. This game could have had the perfect redemption arc for the Cocos, and nope, it just made me hate them even more than I did during my original playthrough. Each character also gets special abilities that use gauge energy that can only be refilled by collecting rings. Mostly used for, certain parts in the overworld, there will be, these purple signs with a treasure chest on it, and it indicates that there's a hidden switch that can be activated when using the character's special powers. So Amy's special involves her slamming her hammer into the ground. So yeah, it's a shame that that's all her hammer is used for. A parry attack and a special attack that's only used for activating switches. So each character can also get upgrades to their boost mechanic. So when they max out on rings, they can trigger a faster way to travel. So for Amy, she gets a really bizarre transformation where her hammer and tarot cards combine into a hovercraft. Amy sits on her hammer like a witch sits on a broom, and the cards revolve around her like a giant wheel, propelling her forward. So overall, Amy was my second favorite character to play as in this whole entire game. So after Amy's section completes, we take control of Knuckles. Knuckles plays very similar to how he controlled in games like Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 or Sonic 06. He has a 1-2-3 hit combo that ends in a sky uppercut. He has a drill ground pound attack. He's not able to go underground, though, but he still spins around as he drills downward. And It even has a Quake upgrade that you can get down the line where it causes more of like a boom when he lands to the ground, causing surrounding enemies to be destroyed. Or at least they would if there were more enemies in this game. You barely run into any small enemies. So he has a glide ability, but the steering for it is really bad. Oddly enough, Knuckles does get a homing attack. Knuckles is the only character aside from Sonic who can climb up the green surface walls. Except where Sonic runs up them, Knuckles is physically climbing up them. However, Knuckles can climb up exclusive red walls that not even Sonic can latch onto. I really did not like the climbing sections, though, because there was like one optional challenge that was necessary to expand part of the overworld map a bit, so you could see more of where certain things are, and it required Knuckles going up like a maze of nothing but climbable surfaces, and there's a lot of obstacles you had to avoid, and that part was really acting up on me. Knuckles kept slipping. Every time I latched onto a wall, he kept bouncing off of it somehow, and I kept trying to fiddle with the joystick for him to just stay on there without slipping off. I don't know what the deal was, but the collision on this was really bad. So it's like, darn it, cool ideas, but just terrible execution. It's like the problem in Sonic 06 was he kept getting stuck to walls, and then this one, he couldn't stay on them. He kept slipping off them, and so, unfortunately, Knuckles cannot climb up nearly any surface like he could in the Adventure or Genesis games, which is a real shame. Knuckles has two Max Ring boost abilities. One that gives him a faster glide that goes on infinitely, so he won't like de-accelerate while he's in that form. He won't like he won't lose altitude or anything. He'll just keep like dashing straight forward. And so you can get some really good distance with that. And another one allows him to rapidly drill on the ground. So when he's on the ground and you use his boost, he'll start spinning rapidly, kind of like the drill wisp from Sonic Colors. So Knuckles has great traveling distance when it comes to his max gliding, but unfortunately he has the weakest jump height, and he can't reach the same heights as characters like Amy or Tails, unfortunately. Knuckles' special ability is a punch to the ground that creates an explosive earthquake. So Knuckles wasn't a bad character, but he was my least favorite character to play as, unfortunately. I even kind of liked playing as Sonic a little bit better. I'd say the only, aside from the gliding and stuff like that, and climbing, the only thing that Knuckles has over Sonic is his 1-2-3 punch attacks are much more entertaining than Sonic's typical like punch kick ability. But so Knuckles definitely is a little bit more powerful than Sonic, but he doesn't really get enemies suitable for him to really demonstrate how much more powerful he really is. Finally, we play as Tails, who, in my opinion, is the best character without a doubt, and apparently a lot of other people agree. So, his greatest weakness is that he's the only character in the entire game who cannot use the homing attack, but nearly every other ability he has makes up for that. I mean, he can fly like in previous games. You don't have to rapidly press the A button for him to fly. You just you got to press the A button 3 times and hold it the third time for him to start flying. It has a bit of a delay though, unfortunately. Same with Knuckles and his gliding. And the gliding, you got a triple jump and for it to trigger. And once again, he has a bit of a delay before it triggers. And so yeah, I kind of wish they responded a lot faster, or they should have at least given you an upgrade that allows them to have a quicker recovery time when it comes to using those or something. But he has like one of those traditional springs as a parry attack, and he's the only character who has no physical attacks. His only method of attacking is by rapidly throwing wrenches, kind of like a Hammer Bro from the Mario games. And Tails' special involves firing a plasma cannon. The best part of Tails is that he gets to pilot the Cyclone from Sonic Adventure 2, and he can use his boost energy to summon and power the Cyclone to fly through the air even faster, and he practically breaks the game with how high and far he could fly, making Tails the best character to play as when it comes to exploration. However, all that flying means that Tails will likely be the hardest character for anyone to fully upgrade, because players will be so tempted to want to fly around as Tails, they'll forget that the easiest and quickest way to upgrade characters is to search low on the ground to find the hidden fruit or cocoa scattered around the world, and you're going to be missing a lot of that if you're just too busy flying around, especially with how bad the draw distance is in this game. And so The Cyclone also gets an upgrade to fire a powerful laser cannon, which is needed to blast open purple walls and panels protected by barriers. And so Tails was just the most fun I had in this game, and it reminds me of why I missed these characters and wanted them to be playable after so many years. I mean, I remember ever since Sonic Unleashed, I thought like the first reveal trailer looked good, but I felt sad that Sonic's the only playable character. What happened to Tails, Knuckles, and Amy? Why aren't they in this? And are there going to be other playable characters? And so, I kept having that mindset for over a decade now. And so, to finally see a decent Sonic game where these characters are playable again and they actually put a smile on my face for once, it's like, that's great. So, while fans have been very happy to see these three playable again, even with the criticisms on how underwhelming it might have felt compared to what they envisioned, along with the terrible combat and questionable moveset choices, they were still overall pretty good. You just kind of wish it had a more traditional control scheme and feel like the adventure games. Many found the controls and platforming very clunky and unresponsive at times, and as much as I enjoyed the DLC overall, I absolutely agree. I hated how the game didn't give us a proper character select until after beating the game. And the only way to do it is absolutely annoying. You have to climb the fifth and final tower that leads to the final battle. Luckily, Sonic can activate a switch that allows getting up that tower to be a much quicker travel. But it's still annoying how you have to keep traveling by foot to the tower just to get to the top every time. Just to talk to Master Coco every time you want to change characters. In a way, this game reminded me of Donkey Kong 64 in a way, but with Sonic characters. And I kept going back and forth to how each of those games did one thing better than the other. As overwhelming and tedious as Donkey Kong 64 was to many players, I think the game handled its gameplay a lot better than how Sonic Frontiers handled it, because DK64 had many sections throughout the game's worlds to give you plenty of opportunities to swap between the characters. Sonic Frontiers does not give you the option to swap between characters until after beating the game. And considering how, if you bothered taking your time to fully explore through the game, trying to unlock everything in the overworld, making sure that you max level each character before moving on to the next character, it can take over 6 hours to go through if you're not rushing through it. So, just like DK64, each character has their own inventory, and none of their items are really shared with another. That means if you have a lot of collectibles from your original playthrough as Sonic, none of his items will carry over to characters like Amy or Tails, meaning you have to collect everything from scratch as each character, meaning you'll have to go through it 3 additional times. So, unfortunately, it also means that all the map markers from the final island in Sonic's story were completely reset, and you have to start all over again, not only tracking them down, but completing awful missions with really frustrating challenges and mini games, and just to unlock that part of the map on your display is real annoying. Luckily, this new map is shared amongst all the characters once they are unlocked. You just can't transfer the one from your previous playthrough, but otherwise the map is shared between all the characters once you start the new one. Honestly, I feared I wasn't even going to be able to revisit the game as the other 3 playable characters once I made it to the final trial, because the game prevents you from swapping characters until the final level in battle is complete, and I can imagine many players are going to give up on this game due to how brutally challenging and time-consuming it all is. Sonic's gameplay was the worst part of this otherwise passable DLC expansion. It was more of what we already played through in a majority of Sonic Frontiers campaign, but made to feel more like an expert mode difficulty in the most brutal sense possible. We get some new cyberspace levels. They're optional, but they were also really painful and frustrating messes to get through. They have the most confusing level layouts, really bad physics, really annoying gimmicks, and really strange objectives that were optional but not rewarding, and absolutely no checkpoints. And some of these missions can be really lengthy, and so if you die and have to start all over, it feels like you wasted a whole bunch of your life. So it mostly feels like a rehash of the 4 towers segment before the final island in Sonic Frontiers, but with much more frustrating challenges that await at the top of the towers. mostly involving stripping Sonic back to level 1 stats and forcing him to fight enemies with strict restrictions. Um, some of these restrictions include like very small time limits, disabling certain attacks, and Trials 3 and 4 honestly weren't that bad, but the trial for number 2 is the one that I hear the most people having difficulty with, aside from the final trial. Trial number 5 is the main reason people are complaining about this DLC on Twitter. Trial 5 forces Sonic to go back to level 1 stats. He's forced to fight the first 3 Titan boss fights all at once, with only 400 rings, no recovery between rounds, and it requires much more restricted parry timing, where in the original game you could basically just spam the parry attacks and just hold on to the L and R buttons until the Titans attack you, and you can easily just counter their attacks. And nope, they disable that, and they force you to have like nearly perfect timing. So my recommendation is play it on easy mode, because when you're playing on hard mode, it forces you to time it perfectly. The easy mode does give you a little bit more of a slack. It gives you a little more time. So if you did it a few seconds off, it's not going to punish you for it. Otherwise, you can't like hold on to it like you could before to automatically counter everything. It does require more precise timing. But what makes this trial the absolute worst, I mean, it's bad enough that you're at level 1 and all that, but there are absolutely no checkpoints. And these boss fights also contain the segments at the beginning of each of these boss fights where you have to scale the Titans. And, I mean, it's especially frustrating with the Wyvern, because the Wyvern practically felt like a level. Like, trying to scale up to the Wyvern was like a really long, painful level. So, if you keep dying on this, you have to start all the way back at the first Titan boss fight, Giganto, and you have to rework your way all the way back to Wyvern. And so it's even more frustrating if you manage to make it all the way to the third Titan, the Knight, and if you die there, that means you gotta go all the way back. And, like, I didn't mind having to refight Giganto. Like, that one's a very easy boss fight, in my opinion, but it was getting to Wyvern where the countering for that was just more strict, and then, not to mention how tricky the Knight character was as well. Like, I don't know why, but there are certain times where just at the beginning of the boss fight, Sonic would automatically die somehow. It's like he stepped on something that killed him, and I don't even know what it was. And so that really sucks if you made it all the way there just for Sonic to accidentally immediately die at the beginning. And the Knight boss fight also feels like it takes dumb luck at times, like the part where you had to parry his shield and throw it back at him. That felt like it took dumb luck a lot of the time, so it makes you really nervous if you make it that far. It just makes you pray that luck will be in your favor this time. And so, yeah, like, if the challenge didn't force us to go back to level 1, if it allowed us to carry our max level stats so we could fight these bosses with, like, 999 rings and full stat power, I feel like this challenge wouldn't have been that bad. But, just these restrictions really made this part frustrating. The fact that there's no checkpoints, it took me 3 hours to complete this, and I didn't even think I was going to. I nearly gave up. To think, days ago, I was playing a game called Lies of P, which is an M-rated Pinocchio-inspired game with the brutal difficulty of a Dark Souls game. I made it as far as a Chapter 3 in that game, and I rage quit it. I just said, like, nope, this game isn't for me. I'm just going to look forward to that new Sonic Frontiers DLC instead. So here I thought Sonic Frontiers DLC would give me some fun and addicting gameplay and help me keep my mind off how frustrated I was getting over Lives of P, and give me time to enjoy seeing Sonic's pals playable again. Only for this game to kick my ass for 3 hours straight because I couldn't get past the freaking Wyvern boss fight, and I had to look it up online just to figure out, like, better strategies and how to beat the Titans quicker. Apparently the best trick is to learn how to use the ability, the Psyloop and the Stomp combos. So, like, for the Psyloop, after, like, you do, like, a typical combo, if you press the Y button when your gauge is full enough, Sonic will do a special attack that will sometimes, like, lock the characters into a certain position, making them more helpless, and that allows you to deal more damage on them. And so, the Stomp combo, you do that by, after you do, like, an attack combo, you press the B button to end the combo, and then Sonic will do a pretty powerful Stomp attack. And so, if you just keep like building up your gauges and keep relying on the Psyloop and Stomp, that is the best and most efficient way of defeating these. But of course, it takes more than just attacking them. You got to learn how to master the parries. Learn, and that can be really tricky though, especially during the Wyvern boss fight with how swervy the camera gets. It makes it really a lot harder to really judge like when the Wyvern is about to strike. And so after I trained my mind on how to pull off these combos and how to read the Titan's movements, I went back and kept retrying over and over. And just kept praying that that stupid night boss would just let me throw his freaking shield at him so I could end it already. And after probably 20 tries, I finally beat it. And I just couldn't believe it. I honestly thought I was never going to beat it. And so after this, we move on to the original final battle from Sonic Frontiers. It plays out just like it did before. No level restrictions this time. So you can go in with all of your maxed out stats, luckily. However, upon completion, the story and gameplay takes a drastic turn. So in the original True Final Battle, the true final boss, the End, appears, which is just a giant moon in space. And so as Sage pilots and the defeated fourth Titan Supreme and helps Sonic fight off the End in a frustrating, tedious, and repetitive arcade shooting minigame with no checkpoints, and that part sucked. Followed by an annoying QuickTime event where if you fail, you're forced to start the whole boss fight all over again. It sucked. And so this alternate true final battle, the End approaches and attaches itself to Titan Supreme and gives it an upgrade with additional arms and regenerating powers. This true final battle was very annoying, to be honest. I'll still say I kind of preferred this over the arcade shooter, but I honestly don't even know how I beat it. Like, I didn't die, but I barely made it and wasted a lot of time. It took me longer than it should have. Trying to figure out what I had to do. I beat this without even having to look up what to do. And so Sonic just keeps doing attacks. Nothing happens until a cutscene triggers where Sonic's cyber corruption mixes with his super form, giving him the blue-eyed supersonic appearance he had in the trailers compared to his usual red-eyed super form. Sonic's new super form, all it does is give him a more powerful parry attack that only works if it is timed perfectly, at least if you're playing on hard mode. If you're playing on easy mode, you can parry a little bit easier. But yeah, that's really underwhelming. You get a new super form for Sonic and all they do is change his eye color and give him a parry attack? Really underwhelming. The goal is to keep parrying Supreme the End's attacks and try to get next to the purple tube that the End is using to power Supreme. I honestly don't know how to properly attack the tube, for the game has no target toggling system, making it nearly impossible for Sonic to fly towards that tube and attack it directly. It doesn't help that these stupid trees keep getting in the way of the camera, making the fight even more difficult than it needs to be, especially when it comes to parrying the energy balls he keeps flinging at you. So eventually, after you manage to do some damage to it, Sage shows up with a giant energy shield. She uses it to try protecting both Sonic and Eggman. Amy, Tails, and Knuckles join in and help keep the shield up. Now the boss fight has yet another time limit to add to the mix, so not only do you have to worry about Supersonic's ring count, but now you also have to defeat the boss before it shatters Sage's shield and destroys everyone in the process. So eventually Sonic gets even weaker, but he won't give up and manages to trigger an event where he steals Supreme's giant gun. Eggman attaches the gun to his Eggmobile, as Sonic gets inside of it and uses his super form as a living bullet for the gun. This just gave me Sonic X Season 3 finale vibes, like when Super Sonic and Super Shadow used themselves as bullets in the Blue Typhoon's cannon to defeat Dark Oak. So, the original game had a slightly different ending, with Sage sacrificing herself and dying to protect Sonic from the End's self-destruction, as Super Sonic heroically flies back down to his friends. Meanwhile, we see Eggman sadly reaching out in the distance over the explosion and the loss of his artificial daughter, Sage. And so, this DLC's ending is almost the exact same ending for Sonic and his friends, at least, just with a minor difference, while Eggman's ending is practically a happy ending fan fiction. The game still ends with Sonic meeting up with his friends, being happy to see him, followed by an epilogue of the four saying what they plan to do next, and as they adventure off to go on their own separate adventures. Like, that's like practically the exact same cutscene, but instead of Supersonic heroically flying back down to his friends, like in the original, in this one we see him crash landing as he's reverting back to regular Sonic. Um, Meanwhile, Sonic's friends gather around him to see if he's okay, and after they find out he's okay, they pretty much recycle the exact same ending and epilogue with Amy hugging Sonic as Sonic high-fives Tails, and Knuckles respectfully like nods his head to Sonic. So, meanwhile, we see Eggman watching the end explode in the distance, but this time, Sage is right by his side. So, kind of weird to give Eggman such a happy, sappy ending. Do they remember that Eggman's a villain, right? So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it does leave a lot of questions on, like, how the future of the Sonic series is going to go now that Eggman has more of a family dynamic. I mean, they're practically treating, like, Sage, Orbot, Cubot, and Metal Sonic as his children now, it feels like. Especially with the ending to that Murder of Sonic game. Like, it was kind of funny, but still. So, sadly, there is no additional epilogue. The original game had a post-credit epilogue showing Eggman rebuilding Sage. So it just makes this true ending or alternate ending feel even more pointless. Because either way, Sage is still alive in the end. Because Eggman, like, even if she dies, Eggman could easily just reuse her data and rebuild her. So it seems like she'd even have her memories intact and all that. So what was the point? I don't see the point in giving Eggman this happy ending. It just doesn't. And then, not to mention, it has like a real sappy song after the credits that seems to be a reflection of Eggman and Sage. It just doesn't fit. So, yeah. And so, because they had to get rid of that epilogue with Eggman rebuilding Sage, you're hoping that this new DLC would have offered a new epilogue in its place. And no, they don't have anything to substitute for it. The game also tries sprinkling in more lore and exposition onto the game's setting, but it's all pretty much a huge bore fest that no one asked for. It has some cringy dialogue, bad callbacks to previous games, and it tries tying up some loose ends. All of these moments are optional as they involve the characters meeting up with others on the world map, as they blandly stand around with little to no animations, no expressions either, and spout exposition. The characters just all sound like they're tired and don't give a care about any of this. Makes you wonder if it's actually the character saying that or if this is how the actual voice actors feel. I know I didn't mind the voice acting in the main game of Sonic Frontiers. They tried making the characters sound more mellow and serious, but here in the DLC, it just sounded like they were tired of it. Like, none of the voices were having fun with this at all. And so, yeah, I don't know. I remember thinking people are overreacting when they were joking about it in the original game, but it feels like this, the DLC's voice acting was a parody of how bad people thought it was in the original game. I remember joking in my review for Sonic Frontiers that Sonic and Pals didn't bother saving Big the Cat and just left him stranded in the Cyberverse at the end, but this DLC tried tying up some loose ends by, there's an easily missable optional cutscene where Sonic is talking with Sage, and he questions how Big got onto the island, only for Sage to explain that the purple portals are there. They're actually a manifestation of Sonic's memories, and that the Big he saw was only an illusion, meaning that Big was never actually on the island or in this game at all. The more this game tried explaining its lore or tried tying up loose ends, the more I just didn't care. The more exhausting this game's story and setting got. Suddenly, the Sonic games have Kingdom Hearts levels of confusing storytelling. I'm just glad I finally beat the game and have the freedom to re-explore the island as any of the characters I want. Unfortunately, there isn't much to do after beating the game, especially if you already spent many hours maxing out each character's stats and looking for, things hidden around the world. It's like after that, there just isn't anything else to do. Even after beating the games and saving everyone, the characters still have that annoying distortion filter effect around them. I was really hoping that we can unlock their default designs as an alternate skin for completing the game. I mean, the characters are saved and they're back to their normal self, so why can't we just go around goofing around on these islands in their original forms? I just don't get why that wasn't an option. Apparently, modders already found a way around it, though, but I'm not playing the PC version, so I can't do that, and I don't want to rebuy the PC version just to play as what should have been in this game to begin with. I just wish this game had more stuff to do after beating the game. I wish there were like default costumes, or I wish there were alternate costumes or skins you could get for the characters to liven things up. I wish this game had a store system that encouraged us to go back with each character to collect some things and exchange them for fun cosmetics and abilities. I mean, I hate how the rings are only used for health in this game. I wish rings could also be used as currency, similar to like in Mario Odyssey of the coins, but nothing. The world is still full of extra items lying around that do absolutely nothing in this game, and very underwhelming post-game content. You don't even get to revisit the previous islands as the other characters. You still have to load up like a separate save file if you want to go back to the other islands or revisit them as Sonic, but this DLC requires a separate save state that is built off of your save state from your original save file. And so you don't get to see Amy, Tails, or Knuckles go back to the other islands. You don't get to see them do the fishing mini game. You don't get to play as them in the cyberspace levels, nor do they get to go through any of the previous boss fights that Sonic got to go through. So overall, the DLC is a very mixed bag. I mean, starting off, I overall love this DLC. The characters offered something that Sonic's gameplay didn't provide, and I enjoyed re-exploring the world with each character, especially considering how this DLC came at no extra cost. The other playable characters were the best part about this DLC, while everything involving Sonic was the worst and absolutely most frustrating part of the game. Who would have thought a Sonic game where Sonic is the worst part about it? There still are a few perks to playing as Sonic in this game, like, at least, not for the DLC per se, but going back to playing as Sonic in the regular game. The fishing minigame with Big was kind of fun, the Titan boss fights were really epic. Otherwise, playing as the other characters reminded me of why I was growing tired of only being able to play as Sonic in these games, ever since Sonic Unleashed. And that was because of the lack of additional characters with fun abilities. Sonic Frontiers was overall another typical open-world game with some fun ideas. It's basically an open-world game, but the character can move fast. I mean, a part of me wishes I could play a game like Zelda Tears of a Kingdom and move as fast as Sonic could, but aside from that, I felt like the game had some poor execution with very annoying gimmicks when it comes to like the opening up the overworld map and all of that. Some of the things you had to do to progress through the story were real annoying with its pesky mini games and side missions, but it was still a breath of fresh air compared to every other Sonic game that released after Sonic Generations. Sonic Frontiers DLC makes me hope Sega can take fan criticism seriously and learn from what worked and what didn't work in this game, and try even better next time to make a Sonic game that fits even closer to the adventure games, while avoiding the flaws from those games as well. Overall, fans seemed very positive over the return of Sonic's pals, especially being playable again, but they shared their concerns over questionable gameplay choices, ridiculous expert mode-like difficulty, which really held this game back for many. Maybe the next game could utilize the characters better, with better controls and physics, better abilities, less bland, repetitive, and frustrating worlds to explore, better features and replay value, and overall better difficulty options, so less experienced players don't feel left out of the full game. I don't mind Sonic having a more open-world setting, but I'd like more traditional levels in the sense of Sonic Adventure games, not like the cyberspace levels in this game that just had awful controls and physics. A game that plays more like a 3D platformer of the Sonic Advance games would be a really welcoming idea, like taking the gameplay elements of Sonic Advance but converting it into a Sonic Adventure-like game. So you can control as any character in any level, using each character's strengths and weaknesses to challenge yourself in different ways. That would be really cool. It is really hard to recommend this DLC to others. I mean, even to like the most diehard Sonic fans, because even if you are really having fun with this game to start off, there's no denying that people are probably gonna Depending on who you ask, people are either going to love or hate this DLC just because of the difficulty of Sonic's gameplay. And the fact that that alone is necessary if you want to go back to playing as those characters you'll work so hard on leveling up. The fact that the only way to get back to them is to beat that dang final boss gauntlet and that final boss that just keeps spamming attacks and just drags on forever. It's almost not worth it at times. So this is really hard to recommend. Overall, I'd give the DLC about a 6 out of 10, praising it for the fun gameplay of playing as these other characters again who have been missing for so long, but taking many points off for Sonic's frustrating portions of the game, along with some questionable moveset decisions and along with the faulty gameplay of Sonic Frontiers in general. So it's overall I did enjoy it, but it is a very mixed bag, I must admit, just like the main game itself. Still the most fun I've had with a Sonic game in years, though. Anyways, that's all I have to show for now. Thank you for watching. See you next time, and have a great day.